She is the #1 player in the world. She has held that ranking for 89 straight weeks, longer than almost anyone else on tour has managed in the last 2 decades. So why did she just smash a tennis ball clean out of Wimbledon's most famous stadium in front of thousands of fans after losing a match she was supposed to win? You saw the clip. Maybe you laughed. Maybe you rolled your eyes and thought, there she goes again, another diva moment from another spoiled champion. That is the easy read. That is the read everyone had within minutes of it happening. But here is the problem with that read. Aryna Sabalenka does not act like this. Not normally. This is a woman who has spent 2 years being praised for her composure, her professionalism, her ability to lose a set and still look calm, walking to her chair. So what changes in one single moment, on one single afternoon, that turns the most consistent player in women's tennis into someone who cannot control her own hands? Was it just frustration? A ball hit in anger, forgotten by tomorrow? Or was it something else? Something that had been building for weeks, maybe months, waiting for one bad afternoon to finally break through? Because here is what nobody was talking about in the hours after that clip went viral. This was not an isolated incident. This was not one bad day. By the time you finish this video, you are going to understand exactly what was happening underneath that moment, why it may end up defining the next chapter of her entire career, and why the real story here is not about a tennis ball at all. To understand what really happened on that court, we need to go back, not to that match, not even to that tournament. We need to go back several weeks, to the moment where this whole thing actually started, and nobody noticed. Let's talk about who Aryna Sabalenka actually is, because that context matters more than you think. She is a 4-time Grand Slam champion. She has held the #1 ranking since October of 2024, which in tennis years is an eternity. She is chasing something only a handful of players in the history of the sport have ever done, finishing back-to-back years as the undisputed best player on the planet. Names like Serena Williams, Martina Navratilova, that level of company. So when we talk about her losing a match, we are not talking about a rising player hitting a rough patch. We are talking about the best player in the world, at the peak of her powers, on paper, completely unraveling. And this loss was not just any loss. This was the earliest she has exited a Grand Slam in straight sets in 6 years. 6 years. Think about that for a second. That means through injuries, through pressure, through every up and down of a professional career, she had not lost this badly, this early, at a major tournament since before most of her current rivals were even household names. Now look at the numbers behind her at the top of the rankings. The gap between her and the player chasing her for #1 has shrunk to just 407 points. That might sound like a small detail if you are not deep into tennis, but for context, that is the thinnest her lead has been in years. 1 or 2 more results like this and the throne she has occupied for almost 2 years starts to genuinely wobble. So picture the pressure she is carrying into every single match right now. Every point matters more than it used to. Every early exit is not just a bad day. It is ammunition for every commentator asking if her reign is finally ending. This is not a struggling player with nothing to lose. This is the most dominant woman in tennis right now, and she is visibly shaking. That is what makes this so different from a normal athlete having an off day. When a lower-ranked player loses early, nobody blinks. When the world #1, the woman built a reputation on being unshakable, starts falling apart in full view of the cameras, that tells you something bigger is happening beneath the surface. And if you are new to her story, or you only know her from the headlines, stick with me here, because what we are about to walk through together is not just about one tennis match. It is about watching someone at the very top of their profession start to crack in real time and figuring out exactly why, before she even fully understands it herself. Because the truth is, the scariest part of all of this is not the ranking points. It is not the Grand Slam record. The scariest part is something much more human, and it has been building quietly, match after match, for longer than anyone realized. Let's rewind 3 months. Because Wimbledon was not the beginning. It was the third domino to fall. Start with Roland Garros. The French Open. Sabalenka is up 6-3, 4-1 inch the quarterfinal. She is 1 set and 1 break away from cruising into the semifinal. This is the kind of lead that should be a formality for the best player in the world. Then something breaks. She loses the next 10 games in a row. 10 straight. Diana Schneider, a talented player but nowhere near Sabalenka's level on paper, takes the match 3-6, 7-5, 6-0. After that loss, Sabalenka told reporters she wanted to quit tennis. Not took a break, not needed time off. Quit. Ask yourself something. How does the best player in the world lose 10 straight games from a commanding lead and then talk about walking away from the sport entirely? Is that frustration talking? Or is that someone telling you exactly how much pain they are actually in? Now, fast forward to Berlin. This time it is the semifinal against Jessica Pegula. Sabalenka wins the first set, loses the second in a tiebreak. Then, in the deciding set, the set that determines who moves on, she loses it 6-0. A bagel. In the biggest moment of the match, here is what makes that specific loss almost impossible to ignore. Since the WTA rankings began being recorded, no world number 1 had been bageled in a deciding set multiple times in a short stretch like this. Not once in the history of the ranking system. This is not just a bad set. This is something historically rare happening to the single most dominant player on tour. And it is happening repeatedly. So we have Roland Garros, we have Berlin. 2 different tournaments, 2 different opponents, the exact same pattern. A lead, a collapse, a complete inability to close. But here is the part that should really worry you. What happened at Wimbledon was not even the worst version of this story yet. Against Naomi Osaka, Sabalenka did not just lose. She failed to create a single breakpoint the entire match, not one. Against a player she has beaten before, on a day that mattered more than almost any other day this season, she could not manufacture a single opportunity to fight back. Afterward, she said it herself. With every game we would play, I would feel worse. She would feel better. She would just go for her shots freely. I wouldn't. Read that again. She is not describing a tactical breakdown. She is describing watching herself lose control in real time and being powerless to stop it. 3 tournaments, 3 different opponents, 3 completely different styles of tennis, and yet the exact same emotional collapse, arriving right at the moment it mattered most. Is that a coincidence? 3 separate bad days that just happened to line up back to back to back. Or is that a pattern? One that has nothing to do with her forehand or her footwork, and everything to do with something happening in her head the moment pressure peaks. Because if it is a pattern, that changes everything about how we should be looking at that ball she smashed out of Wimbledon. It stops looking like an isolated tantrum. It starts looking like the final crack in something that had already been breaking for months, in front of all of us, while we were too busy watching the scoreline to notice what was actually happening to the player standing behind it. Here is where most of the coverage got it completely wrong. Everyone treated that smashed ball as the problem. The headline. The moment worth talking about. But that ball was not the problem. That ball was the release valve. It was the very last symptom of something that had been building for weeks. Completely out of view. In places, no camera was pointed. Because here is what Sabalenka revealed, almost quietly, in the middle of all this chaos. After the collapse at Roland Garros, after the talk of quitting, she did not just take a short break to rest her body. She reached back out to a sports psychologist she had worked with before. Not a new one, the same one. And she explained exactly why. She said she did not want to start over with someone new, because that would mean telling her entire story again, making a stranger understand her all over from the beginning. Sit with that for a second. This is not a woman dealing with a physical injury. This is not fatigue or a sore shoulder. This is the number 1 player in the world, quietly admitting that the thing threatening her season is not in her legs or her serve. It is in her head, and it has been for long enough that she needed professional help to manage it. Now flip everything you assumed about that Wimbledon moment. You probably watched that clip and thought, there is a champion acting unprofessional, letting her ego get the better of her. But what if it is the opposite? What if that ball flying out of the stadium was not arrogance at all? What if it was the only visible piece of a pressure that had been sealed shut for months and finally had nowhere left to go? Think of it like a pressure cooker. You can turn the heat up on that pot for weeks, and from the outside, nothing looks wrong. The lid stays on. Everything looks calm and controlled. But the pressure inside is building the entire time, invisible, until one day the valve gives out and steam shoots out all at once. To everyone standing nearby, it looks sudden, it looks dramatic, it looks like something just went wrong in that exact moment. But the truth is, the moment the valve blows is never actually the beginning of the problem. It is the end of one. Wimbledon was not where this started. Wimbledon was just where it finally became impossible to hide. And this is not just a theory some commentator invented to get clicks. Boris Becker, a three-time Wimbledon champion himself, someone who understands exactly what this level of pressure does to a player, went public right after that match. He said something is fundamentally not working anymore, and that Sabalenka needs to figure out what it is. A former champion looked at the exact same footage everyone else was mocking online, and saw a warning sign instead of a punchline. Now put his words next to her own. Sabalenka herself admitted in her own press conference that she was about to lose it out there. Not lose the match. Lose it. Her composure. Her control. The very thing her entire reputation was built on. A legend on the outside sensing something broken. The player herself, from the inside, confirming it in almost the exact same language. That is not a coincidence. That is confirmation, coming from two completely different directions at the exact same time. So, here is a question worth sitting with before we go any further. If you had to guess, would you say this cracks under pressure and comes back stronger the way some of the greatest champions in history have? Or does this keep building until it becomes something she cannot recover from this season? Drop your honest guess in the comments before you keep watching, because what we are about to look at next might completely change your answer. If you think this is just speculation, some theory built out of one quote and one tweet, I understand the skepticism. So let's not leave it there. Let's look at exactly what Sabalenka has been doing behind the scenes, away from the cameras, because the evidence is a lot more concrete than you might expect. Let's go through it piece by piece, because none of this is speculation anymore. Start with the psychologist. Sabalenka did not just mention it in passing. She explained her reasoning in detail. She said, and this is important, that it is mostly about the mental part of the game, and that she specifically went back to someone she already trusted, because starting fresh with a new person would mean having to explain her entire story from the beginning. That is not a throwaway comment. That is someone telling you in plain language exactly where the real battle is happening. Not on the baseline. In her own mind. Now look at the timing of her break after Roland Garros. She did not push through. She did not grind out the next tournament to protect her ranking points, the way you might expect from someone obsessed with holding on to the #1 spot. She stepped away. She said she needed to recharge before coming back at the Berlin Open. Think about how rare that is. A player at the absolute peak of her career, being chased for the top ranking, voluntarily choosing to pause instead of fight. That is not the decision of someone who is fine. That is the decision of someone who knows exactly how close to the edge she actually is. And then there is the media pressure, the part that never stops, even when she tries to wave it off. Heading into Wimbledon, she told reporters she was not worried about losing the #1 ranking, that she was simply focusing on herself. But here is the thing about saying you are not thinking about something. If you truly were not thinking about it, nobody would need to ask you about it over and over, tournament after tournament, press conference after press conference. The fact that this question kept coming up, week after week, tells you the pressure around her ranking never actually let up, no matter how calm her answers sounded on the surface. Now, bring it all the way back to that moment at Wimbledon. The ball flying out of the stadium stops looking like a random flash of anger. It starts looking like the logical final step in a chain we can now trace, link by link. A collapse at Roland Garros so severe she talked about quitting. A deliberate break to protect her mental health. A rare admission that she needed professional support again. A ranking race that never stopped breathing down her neck, no matter how many times she said she wasn't thinking about it. And then, at the one tournament with the entire tennis world watching, the valve finally gives out. Here is something almost nobody has connected yet. Sabalenka is not just trying to stay number one for the sake of a ranking. She is chasing history. 90 consecutive weeks at number one would tie her with Martina Navratilova, one of the greatest players who has ever picked up a racket. That means every single loss right now is not just a loss. It is a direct threat to a piece of tennis history that is sitting right in front of her, close enough to touch, and slipping a little further away every time she steps on a court and cannot close out a match. So this is not about one bad afternoon anymore. This is about a champion standing at the edge of history, carrying more invisible weight than almost anyone realized, and finally showing us, in one 3-second outburst, just how much that weight actually costs. Which leaves us with one real question left to answer. Not what happened at Wimbledon. We know that now. The real question is what happens next, and whether she can turn this around before the season, and maybe her place in history slips away completely. So what did that ball flying out of Wimbledon actually mean? It was never about disrespect. It was never about a spoiled champion losing her temper over a tennis match. It was the sound of a crown starting to slip, one crack at a time, finally becoming visible after months of holding together in silence. Here is what we know now that we didn't know when that clip first went viral. This is a champion carrying more pressure than almost anyone on tour, chasing a piece of history that ties her to Martina Navratilova while quietly fighting a mental battle serious enough that she went back into professional support just to hold herself together. The ball was never the story. It was just the one moment that battle finally became visible to the rest of us. So what happens now? The second half of this season is going to answer the only question that actually matters. Does Sabalenka take this crack and turn it into the turning point the way so many of the greatest champions in history eventually do? Or does this keep spreading, match after match, until the season gets away from her completely? Because she is not the only one moving right now. Coco Gauff is climbing. Alex Ayala just shocked the tennis world at the same tournament. Iga Swiatek is searching for the form that used to be automatic. The gap at the top of women's tennis has never felt this thin, and every single one of them is watching the same cracks we just spent the last 20 minutes examining. So the real question is not what happened to Sabalenka at Wimbledon anymore. We answered that. The real question is who ends up sitting on that throne when the dust finally settles, and whether the woman who has held it for 89 straight weeks still has enough left to hold on. If you want to be there when that question finally gets answered, this is exactly the story we are going to keep following. Subscribe now, because the next chapter of this rivalry is about to move fast, and you are not going to want to find out what happens after everyone else already knows.